My name's Patricia, and for 41 years, my husband Robert and I built something we believed was unshakable: a marriage, a home, and a retirement we earned one paycheck at a time. We retired with just over $500,000 in savings. 3 years later, that number was $40,000. This is the story of how that happened and who let it happen. Robert spent 38 years as a machinist at the same manufacturing plant outside Cleveland. I taught elementary school for 32 of those years. Neither of us made extraordinary money. What we had, we built slowly: a modest 401k, a pension from Robert's plant that had mostly been phased out for younger workers by the time he retired, and a habit drilled into both of us by parents who'd lived through harder decades of never spending what we hadn't already saved. When Robert retired at 65, we sold the house in Ohio and moved to Tampa. We told ourselves it was for the weather. Really, it was because our daughter Jennifer had settled there 8 years earlier, and we wanted to be close to her, and eventually, we hoped, to grandchildren. Jennifer was 34 when we moved. She worked in property management, dated on and off, and always seemed just slightly out of reach financially. Not in trouble exactly, but never quite settled either. We didn't pry. Parents learn eventually when to stop asking. About a year after we arrived, Jennifer told us she'd started seeing someone. His name was Craig. She said he worked in finance, financial planning specifically, and that he was, in her words, really good with people our age. Looking back, I wish we'd heard that sentence differently. Craig came to dinner about 6 weeks after we first heard his name. He was polished, good posture, a firm handshake, the kind of easy confidence that reads as competence when you're not looking closely. He asked Robert thoughtful questions about his career. He asked me about teaching. By the end of the evening, he'd mentioned, almost in passing, that he ran an independent financial advisory practice and that he specialized in retirement protection strategies for exactly our situation: a fixed nest egg, no more income coming in, needing it to last 20-25 years. Jennifer was the one who pushed us toward him, not aggressively, gently, the way a daughter does when she genuinely believes she's helping. "Mom, Dad, you should really let Craig look at your accounts. He's saved his clients so much in fees. He's not like the guy at the bank who just parks your money and forgets about it." We'd been with the same generic bank advisor for years, the kind who called twice annually and read numbers off a screen. Craig, by comparison, seemed like he actually cared. He came to our house. He asked about our goals, not just our balances. He talked about legacy, about grandchildren we didn't have yet, about the kind of retirement that still lets you live, not just survive. We moved our accounts to him within 2 months. The first year looked good, genuinely good. Statements arrived showing solid returns, slightly better than what we'd been getting at the bank. Craig called periodically, always warm, always reassuring. He'd mention Jennifer in these calls too. "She talks about you two all the time. She's so glad you're settled here." Small threads that kept weaving the two relationships together, the financial one and the family one, until they didn't feel separate anymore. Somewhere in year 2, the statements got harder to read. Not wrong exactly, just denser. More funds I didn't recognize the names of. A line item called a wrap fee that Craig explained when I asked as just how the industry packages management costs, totally standard. I didn't push further. I'll be honest about that. I trusted him because my daughter trusted him, and I trusted her. Robert asked more questions than I did. He'd always been the more skeptical one. 38 years on a factory floor teaches you not to take anyone's word for anything without checking it yourself. He asked Craig more than once for a full breakdown of where exactly our money was invested. Craig always had an answer. Always smooth, always slightly too long, circling back to reassurance rather than specifics. "Robert, if I get too deep into the technical weeds, we'll be here all night. The short version is you're protected, you're diversified, and you're on track." Robert let it go. I think, looking back, some part of him didn't want to be the difficult father-in-law who didn't trust his daughter's boyfriend. We both made that choice in our own ways. We chose comfort over scrutiny. It was a phone call from our actual bank, not Craig's firm, our regular checking bank, that started to unravel everything. A fraud department representative called to confirm a wire transfer of $11,000 initiated that morning out of an account we didn't remember authorizing anyone to touch beyond routine management. I told them we hadn't made that transfer. They told me it had come from an account linked to Craig's firm with Robert's electronic signature on the authorization. Robert had never signed anything that day. We were in fact sitting in our own living room the entire morning. That single phone call is what finally made us do what we should have done 2 years earlier: request a full, independent accounting of every account Craig managed for us going back to day one. We didn't go to Craig for that. We went to an independent, fee-only financial advisor a friend from our old church had recommended, someone with no relationship to Craig, no relationship to Jennifer, nothing to protect but the truth. Her name was Diane Whitfield, and I remember exactly how she looked at us in that first meeting, kind but very direct. "She needs to understand," she said, "that once I start pulling these records, I have a legal obligation to report certain things if I find them. I want you to be ready for that." We told her to pull everything. It took 3 weeks. What she found was worse than either of us had let ourselves imagine. Of our original $500,000, roughly $200,000 had been moved over 18 months into a series of high-fee, high-commission investment products that benefited Craig's firm far more than they benefited us. Products Diane said a fiduciary advisor should never have recommended for people our age and risk tolerance. Another significant portion had been eaten by advisory fees that, when added up across 3 years, came to nearly 4 times the industry standard. And the $11,000 transfer, the one that triggered the fraud alert, wasn't the only unauthorized transaction. Diane found 6 more over the previous year, smaller amounts, moved into an account that, when traced, belonged to a shell business registered under Craig's name. Total unauthorized transfers, just under $60,000. Between the predatory fee structure, the inappropriate investments, and the outright theft, our $500,000 had become $40,000 in 3 years. A long beat, heavy. The hardest part wasn't even the number. The hardest part was the question Diane asked us gently near the end of that meeting. "Did your daughter ever handle any of the paperwork for these accounts? Sign anything, forward anything, have access to any of the login information?" She had. Small things, we'd told ourselves, helping her aging parents with the parts of modern finance that felt confusing, setting up online access so it's easier for you to, forwarding statements Craig sent her so I can keep an eye on things for you. At the time, it felt like care. In hindsight, it was access. We didn't accuse Jennifer of anything that day. We didn't know yet what she knew versus what she'd simply been kept in the dark about, the way we had been. But we knew we needed to talk to her before we did anything else, and we needed Robert and me to have that conversation together, calm, before anger took the room. We asked Jennifer to come over on a Sunday afternoon. Craig came with her, uninvited, which told us something before either of them said a word. Craig opened by being reassuring, the same tone he'd always used. "I know the paperwork can look alarming out of context. I promise you everything I've done has been in your best interest." Flat. Robert, who does not raise his voice easily, put Diane's full report on the table between them and said only, "Then explain the shell company." Tense. Quiet. Craig didn't have an explanation that held together. He talked about temporary holding structures and standard industry practice until Robert simply said, "We're done listening," and turned to Jennifer. Gentle, careful. "Did you know that money was being moved out of our accounts we never authorized?" A long pause, heavy. Jennifer didn't answer right away, and that silence told us more than any answer could have. She said she didn't know the theft, the unauthorized transfers specifically. I believe that for what it's worth, but she admitted she'd known for at least a year that Craig's fees were far higher than what he'd told us, and that she'd forwarded our statements to him without ever really reading them herself, because, her words, "I didn't want to get in the middle of your finances." Bitterly, she'd gotten in the middle of everything else, just not that. Measured, final.
We asked Craig to leave our house. He did, still talking, still explaining, right up until the door closed. Serious, resolved. What came next took almost a year. We filed a formal complaint with the state's Financial Regulatory Board, and separately with the SEC, since some of what Craig did crossed into securities fraud. Through a civil settlement, we recovered a portion of what was taken, not all of it. Diane was honest with us from the start that full recovery is rare in these cases. We got back roughly half of what was stolen outright, though the money lost to inappropriate investments and inflated fees were largely gone for good, absorbed into an industry that, as Diane put it, makes its worst behavior very hard to undo fully. Quiet, reflective.
Jennifer and I didn't speak for almost 4 months after that Sunday. It wasn't punishment exactly. I think we both just needed time to understand what had actually happened between us and what hadn't. She wasn't the one who stole from us, but she'd been careless with the two most important people in her life in a way that cost us more than money. We've rebuilt something since then. Not what we had before. That particular kind of easy trust doesn't fully come back, and I've made peace with that. But she calls now, and she asks real questions, and she was the one, eventually, who suggested we all sit down with Diane together so she could finally understand in plain language exactly what had happened to the people who raised her. Robert and I are still in Tampa. Our retirement looks different than we planned, smaller, more careful, rebuilt slowly with Diane's help over these last 2 years. We're not where we hoped to be at this age. But we're clear-eyed now, in a way we weren't before, and there's a kind of peace in that too. Here's what I want other people our age to take from this. Trust in a financial advisor should never be inherited secondhand through a family member's endorsement without your own independent verification. Charm is not a credential. Ask for full, written explanations of every fee, every investment, every transaction, and don't accept "it's too complicated to explain" as an answer. If someone can't explain it, that's information in itself. It's not distrustful to get a second opinion, even from someone your own family recommends. It's responsible. Love does not disqualify someone from being wrong or from being used as an unwitting bridge to something worse. Protecting yourself financially isn't about doubting the people you love. It's about making sure no one, including the people who love you back, accidentally opens a door that should have stayed closed. We built that $500,000 over 4 decades, one careful choice at a time. It took less than 3 years and one smooth-talking man to take most of it away. But it took us finding our footing again to understand that the money, in the end, mattered less than making sure it never happens to anyone else the way it happened to us. If this story resonated with you, or if you've ever had to untangle trust from betrayal within your own family, I'd like to hear about it in the comments. Subscribe for more stories like this one. Every week, we tell the quiet ones.